it'd be great to have the dwarf planet Ceres as a sponsor for the show, because most people don't understand that Ceres is 1/4 the mass of the asteroid belt. And if you just looked at that dwarf planet, you go, that's a planet, but it's not. It's a dwarf. It's just orbiting in that asteroid belt. It's an amazing object.
It is crazy. It is crazy how Pluto got downgraded. I'm really upset about that. Never forget, man.
It's about definitions.
Pluto is one of the coolest planets out there.
The problem with Pluto is that it has Charon, that moon, orbiting it, but they orbit each other. So the center of gravity for that system is outside of Pluto. So you can't call that a planet. You can't do it. But I understand the feeling.
Well, you're a lawyer. You're being technical. It's still, I grew up knowing it as a planet. It identifies as a planet.
It can certainly do that.
It identifies as a planet. It is a planet as far as I'm concerned, damn it.
That's a t-shirt or a hat like Pluto. I identify
the space store sells Never Forget Pluto.
Okay. Is it a hashtag Never Forget?
We need to add the identifies as a planet.
I think people would clamor for that. They would love that.
I'm gonna write that down. I'm gonna make it today.
I think the other thing I'd like to see in the space store, which is not space related, but it's interesting, are hats that say plaintiff and hats that say defendant. I think people would love to have.
You think it's a Halloween thing?
I think it's a year-round thing. I think people want to wear a hat.
I might need one of those.
It's great to see you. How have you been?
I've been fantastic, man. You know, it's so exciting. This is will be our second episode.
That's right.
Of Freight Expectations. And what's fun about this, Matt, is that you and I are very high energy people who say whatever comes to mind, very little filter. And we launched the first one. It is one of the most successful podcasts we've ever launched.
There you go.
First show. And we've done very little to market it. We just show up. And, you have an attorney, which, people love attorneys.
They do. They always tell me I love to meet attorneys. That's actually never happened.
People love all the opinions that I have. Always. They're 100%.
Never and the beautiful thing about both of us is that we're never wrong about anything. That's the part that I find the most validating about all of this.
Those are the rules, especially, So the good news is I can't get fired in any of this.
I think we're in a similar position because I've been running my own show for a little bit. So I'm my own lawyer, got my own little law firm. And so I'm insulated from this world to a very small extent.
It is quite nice of having the freedom to say what you think.
Absolutely.
And this is not LinkedIn, baby. The problem with LinkedIn is everybody, it's so fake.
I think that LinkedIn is the place where brands have been able to commandeer individual human beings. And most of these people who are on LinkedIn, they are great. In person, they're great people. But ultimately, they're just out there promoting themselves as a part of the overall company. So it's fascinating to see how it develops.
Well, I think there's two types of ways to get a reputation on social media. There's the positive comment and being productive and a thought leader like you do. And I'd like to think I do. And then there's this shit post. And I asked a friend of mine who runs an influencer data company. I'm going to move my desk up. This is like high tech technology in the video land here. I have a standing desk. I'm trying to get more fit and stuff. But anyways, I asked my friend who runs an influencer data company, what do you do about your haters? And he's like, that is your most powerful audience, man.
People want to engage. That's right.
They drive the algorithm. In fact, a couple of years ago, I've now blocked him because I just got tired of reading his stuff. But Eric Johnson, I would find out what FreightWaves posted on an article by seeing Eric Johnson's post because he knew about it before I did.
Oh,
even
my goodness.
FreightWaves.com. So I would what is he talking about? It's clearly about us.
Yeah.
And I would go, oh, that's what it means. But now I just block him because I hadn't thought about that. I hardly ever think of that guy. But it is sort of this thing of your haters are your most powerful parts of your audience.
Yeah. I mean, the machines are driven by engagement. And you are more likely to engage with something that makes you feel unhappy than you are about something that makes you feel happy. So I think when you try to make content, it's this experiment of what do people want to see? And then also what do people not want to see?
But the secret to all of this, to be a successful social poster, is you have to ignore the comments. Yeah. And that's hard. A friend of mine who advises a lot of politicians, he's a family member, high levels of government. And he, working with some of the biggest politicians in America, he told me, he's like, first thing I always tell everybody that's a public figure is just don't read comments. He's like, they're out there, ignore them.
That's right.
Just ignore them. And so that's how I try to do, just post and not spend any time.
They call that post and ghost. You post, you disappear,
Post
and then it
ghost,
comes back later.
So people try to engage me, but I just ignore it because I think it's more, frankly, more productive to do so.
I'm with you. There's certain platforms I will engage with. So the ones that I do the most, like when someone comments, I was like, this is garbage, is actually Reddit. So I have learned from what Reddit is so interesting to me is that the brokers, the shippers, the motor carriers, anybody, they're there anonymous for the most part. And I'm the same kind of caricature of myself that I am in real life as I am on there. And so I'll post like an article that I've written for FreightWaves, and all people come in and say, this is bullshit. I'm like, well, let me explain to you why you have to care about this. And if you don't care about it, I guarantee you your boss does. I guarantee you your boss does.
I don't spend a lot of time on Reddit. I spend most of my time on X. That's my home.
It's so chaotic. I don't know how you do it.
Oh, it's so great, though. The information flow. It is dopamine hit after dopamine hit, which I'm a dopamine addict. And
I respect that.
There was a period of time when I was trying to finish my book in August that I had worked on this project for 3 some odd years, and I was just trying to get it to be done with it. And I decided to delete the X account for a couple of weeks to just like focus, because I knew
take a breath.
I knew it was on my mobile phone. But you know what's crazy? I have a Garmin watch that tracks my sleep. It was the only time I ever reached sleep scores that were green. They're always blue, and it's like it always says I'm under rested. It was for that week, for like those 3 weeks or whatever it was, I had the best sleep scores ever.
Social media is not good for us, Craig. It's not good for us.
Night, you're supposed to get off social media at least an hour. Like you're not supposed to be on any screen an hour before you sleep. At least that's what people recommend. Mm-hmm. I can't do it, man. And I find if I wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of the night, what do? I hit my phone.
That's right.
And then I start dreaming about the things that I was posting. So I don't know, man. It's this is not healthy stuff, by the way. Like these are not recommending. This is not good advice.
Yeah, don't take health advice from 2 guys in freight. Like we're not the people that you want to learn about, like how to get better sleep, how to be more rested, how to be healthier generally. Do things we don't do, and that might be the better outcome for people. Like
it definitely is. So speaking of healthy outcomes, Matt.
Yeah.
I think you have been talking about this issue, like cargo theft is this really, really, really challenging thing, right?
Yeah.
Like I think the numbers I read last night was like $30 billion.
Yeah, TIA came out with that number.
Theft.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That is, what is interesting about that number is that is bigger than the U.S. barge industry. That is also about, it's like, well, who cares? I care about barges.
Barges are important.
Cool.
They're important.
They're so important. They drive the vital, but it's about half the size of the LTL market. LTL is about $60 billion. $30 billion in cargo theft is its own mode of traffic.
What I find interesting about this and why I think we're seeing this attention to it now, we haven't seen historically. You look at retail theft, like people stealing from a retail store. It's $1 trillion a year problem. So Walmart, Target, and Meijer, they live this every day, but it's not generally organized. It's not a syndicated cartel stealing lip gloss out of the Walgreens. It is something different. And what we're seeing in our industry today is not just opportunistic theft, which has always been around, but this very, very well organized, orchestrated cartels coming in and find all the weak parts of our industry. And that's the thing you and I talk about is how many weak points does this industry have? There's so many. There's so many places.
Like I think we have to give credit where credit is due. The ATA is right on this issue. They are absolutely, Chris Spear going in front of Congress and focusing on an issue that actually is a plague on our industry. It's a plague on society, bringing attention to it. So I applaud the ATA on getting this right. They're on the right side of history here. And like, in fairness to the ATA, they're right on many things that they have advocated for. They're not on the driver shortage narrative. Mm-hmm. But they have been right on this particular issue, is that cargo theft is going to take congressional oversight, and it's going to take law enforcement actually attacking the problem. Like you have to convict, you have to investigate and convict the criminals. And there has not been a lot of attention on it, but I think now it's becoming so pervasive that they have no choice but to do it.
Yeah, let's unpack the law he was talking about. The proposal is called CORCA, the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. It's been proposed for a couple of years now. It has over 160 co-sponsors in the House and the Senate. It is Republicans, it is Democrats, but more than that, it is every single industry group in our space. ATA, TIA, IANA, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, every one of them has come out and said, we need to have this type of law. And what this law does, it is different. And why it is so important is it creates a group under the Department of Homeland Security specifically to go after this organized retail crime theft, allowing federal agencies, state agencies, municipalities to collaborate, because that's where these thieves have been so productive. No one knows who to go to. You get your load of stuff stolen for 200 grand. We don't realize it's part of the Sinaloa cartel. It's grabbed your freight and you now will never see it again. So I love to see this push. And now that the administration is so key on fixing the supply chain, this is the right time for them. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think ATA pushing this is bringing it to the forefront once again. And hopefully we'll see this thing passed, if not this year, maybe early next year.
Well, I think Homeland Security is important because it has a much larger funding. I mean, this is what's interesting about the big, beautiful bill, is that the amount of money that went into law enforcement, immigration enforcement, Coast Guard, Border Patrol is astounding, the amount of money. And I think that's interesting because years ago, Peter Zeihan, who we've had at F3 before as a speaker, he is a geopolitical thought leader, and he has, is someone who comes out with opinions. He has a lot of opinions as well. Sometimes but he's been largely right about a number of things geopolitically. Like he's been right about his sort of core thesis about demographic challenges around the world. And like basically as you have an elderly, as the population shifts to more elderly people, it means an economy is going to slow because they're really the people who are the wealth generators in an economy that do the work, the productivity, are younger. And so that's his core thesis. But one of the things he said years ago, I watched this video, he's like, the Republicans have always been and this was before this is after, it was really before the 2020 election, I think.
Okay.
But he was basically like, the Republicans are the party of law enforcement. And that's what business leaders want to see. And so it was interesting because you had in some of the decisions that Trump made earlier in his presidency did not look like that. He was sort of pivoting away from the law enforcement thing. Yeah. We've seen the defunding of police, but this term, it feels like he's gotten that message. And he knows that like the weakness of the Democrats is really around some of the lack of law enforcement. The fact that like that is the most winning message politically is that the law enforcement is for and front to the platform. And I think that sort of ties into the base.
My feeling with all of this is that we have talked about supply chain as essential since COVID. It was essential before COVID too, but we look at it and go, this is essential. But we don't take the time and say, well, if it is essential, if it's this important, is it working the way we think it should work? And what I see the Trump administration doing at least on the truck driving side, trucking generally, in this administration, in this term, is, okay, let's talk about driver training. Let's talk about the schools. Let's talk about driver qualification, English language proficiency. Let's talk about safety. Maybe we'll talk about vehicle maintenance someday. But then you look and say, well, what is the issue these trucking companies, these brokers, these shippers continue to talk about? It's cargo theft. It's the stuff that we made that's supposed to go to you or your family, your kids, can't get there because someone's come and stolen it. And you go, well, that's a civil matter. No, it's not. It is at one level, but it is a criminal matter.
It is a criminal matter. And I think, it's interesting because this whole concept of regulation versus deregulation, because you could argue that a lot of the conversation that comes into the compliance elements, getting rid of non-domiciled CDLs and doing other enforcement actions is tied to regulation. That is an argument. What it actually is a policing matter. Like at the end of the day,
enforcement
comes down to law enforcement, right? Mm-hmm. That's what this is all about. And I think that's why this administration is not going to let that go. That is sort of part and parcel. And I think it plays into the base. where they want tighter law enforcement. They want to know that there is a focus on law enforcement. It goes back to cargo crime has been a failure of law enforcement.
Absolutely.
The safety crisis has been a failure of law enforcement. And I think if you immigration policy has been a failure in the view of the base as a failure of law enforcement. And I think if we understand that everything the administration is trying to do and will continue to do is around law enforcement, then it puts it in perspective that this isn't a regulatory, we're not regulating rates. Like there is no effort, and there never should be, frankly. Like one of the greatest things that happened to our economy is the deregulation of freight rates. If you go back, I did a book earlier this year, and one of the things I really enjoyed doing writing this book was going back and looking at sort of how we got here. And I learned a ton about the days of regulation. And I talked to a lot of folks that lived during the trucking, which is crazy, Matt. A lot of the people who had their careers during a regulated industry, they're out of the industry. They're retired. They're older, and I'm embarrassed to say, or sad to say, that they're dying out.
The stories of the Yellows, the Roadways, the CFs, those are going away.
The companies are dying out, but also the principles.
That's right.
And I think when we start talking about enforcement and rules, we're not talking about regulating the industry from a pricing standpoint and who has the right to run freight. Like that is where we have to stop focusing on that as part of the conversation, because people get caught up in, hey, you want more enforcement, or you want more regulation.
No, right.
I don't want more regulation. What I want is the government to enforce the regulations and ensure the safety and security and economic viability of our industry. And I think the ATA going to Congress and Chris Spear going to Congress, and I've been very critical of the ATA largely over this driver shortage. There are a couple other issues that I've had disagreements with the ATA on, but certainly the driver shortage narrative has been one that has really grinded me because the data is very clear. There's no driver shortage. Right.
You and Jason Miller agree on that topic too, by the way.
By the way, Jason Miller, one of my persistent detractors, we'll call it.
Yeah.
Or some would like to say haters. I don't know if it's hate or
I think
flattery.
He likes you. I just think he likes to also contest. He likes to be
I was disappointed. I was supposed to meet. I've not met him in person. I have interviewed him. By the way, if anyone wants to understand the history of Jason Miller's or his beef with me, should go back to the original COVID surge that happened in 2020. I was very bullish early on in the COVID surge. He was very negative. In fact, I have him on video in July of 2020 as the market was rallying and I was super bullish and we were talking about what we were saying. He was very negative on the economy. It turned out I was right. He was also, during the freight recession, unwilling early on to admit that there was too much capacity in the market because the numbers were so astounding.
Yeah.
I remember Zach Strickland, who wrote an article in 22 where we were trying to explain the freight recession. And volume explains part of it, where there was an economic slowdown in 22. It was the recession that was not a recession, according to the White House. We'll put that aside. but there was this significant slowdown, but there was also this massive capacity surge. And I remember Zach posted this article and Miller just had a field day with trying to detract from the content. There was no way the number of motor carriers expanded by 28%. There's no way the amount of capacity expanded by 19%, because that would be unfathomable. And I don't remember his arguments, so I'm not going to try to argue them or construct his arguments. But I believe what he was saying is this is there's no way that we added that much capacity in the market because of and I think it was used in the employment data. Yeah. And here's the problem with the employment data. And I actually talked to the DOT senior officials at DOT and the Bureau of Transportation Statistics about this specific issue. The problem with the truck employment data is it's not picking up the independent owner operators. And so when you look at the employment data that the Bureau of Labor and Statistics does, when they go out and survey businesses, and it takes a couple of months for them to sort of get a baseline of employment. They do an initial report, which is statistically representative, and they do a report. You always see these revisions as the economy starts to fluctuate. But what's interesting about the employment data is it doesn't pick up independent operators. And so when you look at the employment data as it relates to truck drivers, you actually look like you peak out in 2019. like from a volume standpoint, because you're not picking up the independent operators. And what we've seen is those independent operators continue to expand. They're not being picked up, and not only are not the independent operators not being picked up, but also these guys that are non-compliant. And I actually, I had been thinking about this a lot. I've been thinking about my next book of sorts, what I want to write. And I want to write a book about the Great Freight Recession, like what caused it. I've been thinking about, like, how did we get here?
Yeah. And
I've been on this journey of trying to understand, how did the ATA get it so wrong in the driver shortage issue? Like, clearly these are smart people, and they're not dumb. They have data. They have an enormous amount of credibility. And I'm like, how did they get it so wrong in the driver shortage? And I think what the fallacy in their own understanding is they look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, because historically there was a tight correlation between the BLS truck driver employment data and the number of trucks that were in the market. That broke in the 2016-2017 period. Is that correlation started to really diverge, and it exponentially diverged in 19. And I think the reason that happened is that all of these undercurrents were happening around capacity. Independent operators, illegal immigrants, foreign drivers, companies that were non-compliant, and the people that are in circles, the executive circles of large fleets that I've talked to frequently, and I may have talked to a couple hundred at this point over the last couple of months, will tell me they'd never heard the term non-domiciled CDO ever. Mm-hmm. And I think what is very clear to me now, and I'm going to give the ATA a pass. I'm going to get some hate over the fact that I'm giving them a pass.
I think you and Chris Spears should get together. I think there's some good
I have offered to debate him on the driver shortage issue. But I think, in fairness to the ATA, is that it's very apparent that the problems that have happened in this industry were not obvious to people that are in his circle, nor are they obvious to the executives across the space.
I'm going to push back a little bit, because when I look at this, I feel this kind of is a continuation from the story of deregulation. I'm going to use some numbers here for the folks that are familiar with this industry. But 1980, average driver made $38,000 a year. It's about $120,000, $130,000 today. 70-80% of them were unionized Teamsters. You deregulate the industry and you begin to watch the erosion of what the truck driver made. And if you look at the ATA and who their most vocal members are, and the ATA will say they represent every size motor carrier, but they're generally perceived as big mega fleets.
Yeah. And that's the problem.
Well, so the big motor carriers are watching this new entity, the brokerage community, capture the spot business, capture more and more contract. And so the big motor carriers, the only thing they can control for the most part is how much they pay that driver. And if you look at the numbers, these big motor carriers churn out 100% of the drivers they hire. They hire 10, they lose 10. And that's not a new phenomenon. That's been going on forever. And so you look at what Chris Spear and his members are saying is, I can't find enough drivers. And so the story becomes, the regulations are too tight. Let's make the regulations less tight. Now, you remember this when they said, we're going to have apprenticeships. We're going to have 19-year-olds operate an 80,000-pound machine. And it's like, that's not the recipe. But now you look at it and go, what is the natural consequence of suppressing driver wages? It means that big motor carriers cannot find people who are willing to work for the compensation and the conditions that are currently offered. And then you fast forward, now you have this crazy amount of truck driving schools pumping out 400,000 drivers that are not qualified on our roads. And you go, well, wait a second. Is this what we wanted all along? Of course it isn't what we wanted, but it is what we deserve. And now you see FMCSA pivoting and saying this self-certification, truck driving schools, ELDs, we got to get away from that. So I am with you. I think the ATA has now realized it's a retention issue as opposed to a shortage issue, but their members still need more cheap labor.
I think it was really interesting going back over the last 5 months, because Chris Spear, the ATA, maybe it was 2 years ago, came out. We wrote an article about the truck driver shortage, and it came out and personally attacked me. Like, it was.
I remember that on Facebook. I saw it.
Well, that was different. That was a different post. He did personally on a Facebook post, which I had fun with, by the way. But he actually came out. It was a couple years ago. It was a rebuttal of an article that I was just writing using data, talking about this expansion of the fleet count and the number of drivers the amount of capacity that was expanding and arguing that the ATA membership as a percent of total capacity was eroding. And they came out with a rebuttal on that. That wasn't true. Truck driver shortage, yada, yada, yada. And they were using some weird European data to talk about a truck driver shortage there. It was a very strange.
Best data out there is the one
They actually accused me of having like being driven by an agenda. And I'm like, dog, you're a lobbyist group. So don't even give me like, they were saying they were a neutral source. I'm like, people pay you to go in front of Congress to change laws. They don't pay me to go in front of Congress to change laws. They pay me. People don't pay me to like have an opinion. It's
an event business, and the lobbying is secondary, I think.
I don't know. I think it's the other way around, but we'll put that aside. So anyways, so that was a couple years ago, and it was very clear that this irked them, that this whole driver shortage narrative was very personal. And back in August of this year, there's a great scene where Chris Spear, it's a video that's now on social media. Chris Spear gets in front of Congress and is talking about this driver shortage problem. And he's using the average salary for truck drivers as his counter argument on why we can't have wage increases and have a driver shortage at the same time. And here's why his argument is flawed, is because a large percent of the data set in truck driver employment are parcel and LTL carriers. And let's not forget, not too long ago, UPS had the largest pay increase in history.
That's the Teamsters, baby. Absolutely.
And you remember there was a period, I think it was even a Saturday Night Live skit where they were getting, I think the headline was like $120,000 to be a UPS driver. Yeah. And there was this period of time on X, because this stuff trends really quickly, by the way, as you know. And
very chaotic.
Like, it flashes really quickly, right? And there was a time when everyone wanted to be like, the joke was, I want to be a UPS driver because holy crap.
You can't just go in. You got to work in the warehouse. You got to do other stuff where they let you drive that truck, though.
But a lot of the data that the ATA was arguing was based on parcel carrier data and private motor fleet carrier. And I think the problem is it wasn't picking up the independent operators. So this was in August. Chris Spear said this is an agenda set by people who have a personal agenda. Well, again, OIDA, I understand his arguments towards OIDA, but look, give credit due. Dr. Jason Miller, I will say, has also studied this issue academically and has made the argument using different data sets that I've used. And he's come out against it. I've come out against it. And look, I grew up believing there was a driver shortage.
Yeah.
When I started FreightWaves, I remember our editorial team and our analysts were arguing there is no driver shortage. And I was offended that they were like, how do you not know how do you not believe there's a driver shortage? How do you not, this is very clearly documented by the ATA.
The best propaganda is when you don't realize it's propaganda. That's the best kind.
That's the whole point. And so as I got deeper into this and running FreightWaves and being a more objective, like looking at the data, reporting it, and starting to ask myself, and I think what also is interesting is as Sonar's data started to reveal is, Sonar is the most complete data set, and this is a fact in terms of multimodal intelligence, bringing in all these different disparate data sets. Some of the data you can find in other pockets, like the FMCSA data, you can go onto FMCSA and get that data. But when you put it all together, and what makes Sonar very powerful is because we publish 4.5 million data points a day.
Wow.
Time series data points a day. Every single morning, we're updating 4.5 million, which is a lot of data points. What you're actually able to do is get some answers you've never been able to get. And so as we started to dig into this driver shortage narrative, and we started to see the explosion of the total amount of MC numbers, the total amount of capacity, it became very clear to me, and we see the pressure on tender rejections where they collapse, and spot rates collapse. It became very clear to me that something is different than what we're being told. And the data has revealed now, through Sonar, through our reporting and other sources, that the truck drivers that argued there was no driver shortage were right all along. And it was hard for someone who grew up going to ATA meetings. It was hard. And it wasn't even early on, it was like, well, they're wrong. But then, when they came out and made these attacks personally about how, and they were arguing innocuous data, and they were construing the truth around UPS driver wages and other LTL and parcel wages, like FedEx did increases. It really ruins their credibility on a lot of issues. But what we saw at the ATA convention this year, their management convention, the big one they have every October, is that they actually decided, rightfully so, to come out and say, well, there is not a lack of CDLs. Right. They shift the goalpost. It's not a lack of CDLs. It is a lack of qualified CDLs. And you're
Absolutely.
Like, exactly. We all, OIDA included, have been saying this for years.
Well, the thing is, like, when you reduce the barriers to enter, you get less qualified people. There's no doubt about this. And when, to your point on talking about the driver shortage with like LTLs, like you go to Old Dominion, you go to Saya, you go to UPS, you say, is there a shortage of drivers? They're like, no, like we have great drivers. We have our drivers home every single night. They're made hourly wages. Like they're making $40, $50 an hour. It's a different environment. So when your only set of data you're collecting is what the big over the road for hire motor carriers that are dedicated freight are talking about, that's the problem that you see.
Which is their membership. And that's also, Matt, that's where that ATA tonnage index is a problem. Now, this is where Dr. Miller and I diverge because he's ton mile Miller. Like that is his favorite proxy for data. But it is such a bad proxy.
We're going to have him come visit us here. You know that. Right?
Are you going to, we're going to have to debate this?
I think we're going to have to.
Ton mile Miller is great. All right. So, but the whole problem on the tonnage index is when you're surveying, and like the ATA, the way they get their data is they survey their membership.
Yeah.
And they survey it on ton mile. But if you go back and look at the ATA's volume or tonnage index, which by the way, the Federal Reserve uses to talk about trucking. What's interesting about this particular data set is that it looks like trucking. I mean, let me ask yourself, do you remember 2019, Matt?
I have vague memories of those days. They were good times from what I read. I'm old now, Craig. I'm 40.
But, okay, so 2019 was the bloodbath of 2019. Do you remember this?
Best time ever.
Do you remember this?
I do, absolutely.
It was sort of the big freight recession. We were early to call it in that one. It was small. It was
Freemax. It was very controversial, I think.
It was very controversial. Not that was the first time. We have many other controversial moments since then. But it was there was the largest number of bankruptcies since the financial crisis in trucking happened in 19. And it was small. Volumes dipped down a little bit. Capacity certainly increased. But there was that according to the ATA's index would tell you that was the biggest volume year in history. In fact, the ATA would argue that 2019 was better from a volume stat than 2021. And that should lean, like anyone who's in trucking knows that just isn't the case. You can look at the public earnings of the businesses and know that 2021 was the best year in history for trucking.
Yeah.
And 2019 was a crap year for trucking. And so it's this interesting because the ATA tonnage index says and argues that 19 was better than 21. And like this is data, you can go look it up. I'm not making it up. This is all ATA's data. And what I think is really interesting about that is it tells us that their survey methodology is they're not surveying a sample size of the industry, is that the fleets that represent the trucking industry, the capacity, the total amount of capacity, continue to get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And they don't make up the ATA membership.
Do you see a value for Sonar down the road, maybe doing some collaborations with ATRI? So the American Transportation Research Institute, that is like the ATA's research arm. Are they friendly? Is that a conversation?
No, they're not friendly. I am an enemy of the state.
I can broker a friendship there. I can broker some collaboration.
I don't think Rebecca cares for me very much. I mean, Chris Spear is on the board, so
I can move some.
I don't know that you can certainly try, and we're happy to have a conversation with. Look, ATRI does good stuff too.
Yeah.
Like I mean, I think. The reality is that the ATA on most issues does fantastic work. Mm-hmm. And I'm not here, I'm not here to talk about like, this isn't an ATA conversation, but it's important because this is one that's incredibly polarizing.
Well, I think the
problem is they got it wrong on the driver shortage issue. Mm-hmm. But I think that's interesting because they're pivoting. They're now realizing that narrative is lost, that they are losing and eroding their own credibility. And it's their executives. It's the executives at the largest fleets, their members, the people who sit in those meetings that have told me, companies that if truck drivers knew who I was talking to, the CEOs of these companies, they would be like I can't believe that they're coming out against the ATA. Now, they won't go out and say it to ATA's face. They will have conversations about how frustrated they are with that narrative, or have been frustrated because they clearly know there's a problem. And we can't get construction in the industry until we admit that, acceptance is the first way to do it.
Well,
right?
I think this really ties back, to the initial conversation on CORCA and Chris Spear going before Congress and talking about why this bill matters. Is that what we have is a bunch of really good silos. There's a lot of great silos out there for information, but the only way you solve anything is through some level of collaboration. And so for ATRI and for ATA, they've been running this very narrow race. They've been doing what they do because that's what their members tell them to do, until the world kind of comes and says, hey, just so you know, there's a lot of drivers that aren't qualified. Can you talk about that? And then immediately they start pivoting and they're like, we are really behind this crackdown on CDL schools. We're behind this crackdown on non-domiciled and English language proficiency. Dude, that's been the law for a long time. That's not new law. All this crackdown on CDL schools, that was the law before. There just wasn't anyone enforcing it. And they were the ones who should have known that because their members are hiring those drivers. And so now you see this new changing of the guard where you have to not only admit when you're wrong, but then also take accountability and say, we have to do something different. And to have these old enemies, it doesn't make any sense anymore. You can't do that and have a better supply.
I think it's interesting. And this is true. And so again, off of X content.
So chaotic. It's so chaotic.
It's amazing. But I think and it sort of fits my brain. I have a chaotic, dopamine driven personality. As I think the statement was, the alcoholic personality was the great quote of the week.
That's right.
That was used to ascribe to Donald Trump from what is it, the Iron Maiden?
Yeah, the Vanity Fair piece. Absolutely.
But anyways, it is interesting because I certainly am a recovering alcoholic. 11 years sober, by the way.
Oh, good for you. Congratulations.
But it is interesting because my brain definitely enjoys the dopamine hits that tend to prescribe to alcoholics. But what's interesting about this sort of narrative is that founders as CEOs, there is no consequence of being wrong.
Yeah.
And this was used in the context of Google coming out and saying, the founder of Google, Sergey Brin, come out and saying, we got it wrong on Gemini. We got it wrong on AI. We were late to the game. OpenAI did it. And the comment was made that if you were a public CEO, but you work for the pleasure of the board, you can't have the agency to admit when you're wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same thing when you run an association. I will never expect, I would be utterly shocked to see Chris Spear or the ATA come out and say, we got it wrong. I think it would be remarkable if they came out and said they got it wrong on the truck driver shortage. But I think politically that's too damning.
We were right, but here's the qualifier about how we were not exactly right.
They'll never admit it. And the interesting thing is they were the ones celebrating the introduction of the entry-level driver training program. They were the ones celebrating non-domiciled CDLs. They were the ones celebrating the Obama's decision to erode the ELP mandate. They were celebrating these things because at the time they believed, coming from the fleets that are around them, that there was a truck driver shortage. To your point, those fleets had driver shortages.
Yeah, they experienced that. Those individual companies, absolutely. They did.
I have always contended that fleets will have their own driver shortage. I mean, you had at times at US Express where we would have 400 trucks parked against the fence. There were no drivers. That happens. Yeah. Fleets will have their own driver shortage. But you'll never have an industry-wide driver shortage. You can have a capacity shortage, but the market will correct. And I think that is the sort of the big narrative that they got wrong. But I think they're right on this whole crackdown on cargo theft.
Mm-hmm. There's no other way around it. To back up on the point of the entry-level driving, the 19-year-olds, I was viciously against this.
No, the entry level is different, by the way, Matt.
Well, I mean, they did the apprenticeship program. They did this pilot program a couple years ago to bring.
Well, this is the one they were arguing. This is, by the way, this is what they were arguing in August. And Chris Spear was arguing about the driver shortage in August, pushing for the 18 to 21-year-old drivers.
Yeah, when they were pushing this initially, I pushed back because in literally every single state in the union, you can drive intrastate. You can have a CDL as a 19-year-old moving freight inside that state. You can't go off and cross state lines. And the ATA was making these big arguments like you can go from Chicago down to Carbondale, but you can't go from Chicago to Kenosha or to Milwaukee. And the reality is That's good. Like, we don't need to, if you want to be in this business, there's tons of jobs for you. We do not need to have a 20-year-old who's from New York driving down the Colorado mountains. We just don't need that. And now that they've kind of realized that talking point is not going to resonate anymore, this pivot to, we need to be more collaborative with our regulating agencies. We need better enforcement for our regulating agencies. It just tells me, God willing, in 2026, we'll start tackling the vehicle maintenance, because that's the one I care about. But that's a faraway thing.
Look, I think all of these go back to what we've talked about, is the lack of barriers to entry. But
Absolutely.
Going back to the crime problem, the fraud problem, it's very clear that the issue is that we've allowed so many bad actors to penetrate. And I want to be very clear on this, because I think sometimes this stuff gets so polarizing. Immigrants are not the problem. And even illegal immigrants are not the problem. It's not the humans. It's the fact that organized crime syndicates are taking advantage of those people. They're taking advantage. Now, some of them are. We have bad actors in the immigration population. We have bad actors in Americans.
Absolutely.
Like, you just watch the news and see how kind of messed up we are as Americans at times. But it's not the individual immigrants that are the problem. It is the lack of regulation. It's the lack of adherence to the regulations. And it's the fact that we have allowed, through the lack of enforcement and criminal investigations and funding of law enforcement, and dependent upon the states and the local municipalities to investigate these crimes, that has allowed bad actors to take advantage of the problem. And if you ever ran any kind of business, or ever looked at, working in the banking system or financial system, is anytime that there is a vulnerability, criminals will flock to it. Absolutely. Because that's all they're trying to do. And they only need to be right. They continue to be right. They continue to find these flaws and holes. And you see it in everything from these Nigerian scams of, you're a prince and you win all this money.
Well, I've done that, and I'm waiting for the crown. They said it was in the mail. They said it's in the mail. It'll be here any day.
You're waiting for your $1 billion and some
I was very careful. I did not give them my social security number. I didn't do that. But
you did give them your bank routing account number, right?
Yeah, of course. I'm not an idiot.
Along with your tax return funds and stuff like that.
They needed those. I made sure to black out the social security number. But I think, as you're talking about this, this is a lot, in my mind, self-inflicted. We as an industry love fast and cheap. We want things fast, we want them cheap. And we don't realize, when we offshore all of our carrier sales reps or outsource our dispatching, that people all across the world get to understand how our business runs. And to your point, the criminal cartels, they are just looking for one thing: how to make money. And they find places where there's weak points, and our supply chain is incredibly weak when you understand how things move, and you can infiltrate that. And ultimately, we have to do something, and CORCA is a great step in that direction, but we need Congress to do something. So Congress, if you're listening, pass CORCA. That would be wonderful.
So Matt, let's unpack what CORCA is, because I think it's sort of the core thesis of what you're talking about. Talk a little bit about what CORCA is.
So it's this Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. It was proposed a couple of years ago, and it's been more and more co-sponsors jump on. The fundamental piece of CORCA is it creates a group underneath the Department of Homeland Security that allows law enforcement across all jurisdictions to collaborate together on going after these things. There's a great, Ann Milgram spoke at IANA's meeting. She used to run DEA a long time ago, but you have to look at cargo theft as not trying to stop a specific crime, but as to stop a specific type of cartel that's behind these crimes. And so local law enforcement, like in Joliet, in the Chicagoland area, doesn't know what's happening in San Diego. They have no idea. But that criminal cartel absolutely knows everything. They are watching it, and they have people that are just as sophisticated as our best law enforcement working every day to beat us at the game of moving freight. So CORCA would establish a group specifically designed to stop the retail theft from trains and cars and vehicles, like everything in that space, helping the brokerage community. And ultimately, if they're able to do that, then you can have a centralized way to fight this, because it is done in a centralized way when they're orchestrating it. That's what CORCA really kind of stands for, the proposition to do.
And Matt, I think anyone who, folks that have worked with law enforcement and have trucks stolen or trailer loads stolen or cargo stolen, knows how difficult it is to get local law enforcement to care.
Absolutely.
We had a situation back in when I was doing air freight, we were a competitor to Ford Air. We're the largest competitor to Ford Air. US Express had a company called Express Global Systems, which competed against Ford Air for a couple of years. And I was starting my career out, and I was working the Dallas Fort Worth. This was my sales territory, selling air cargo services. And to be clear, it's road feeder, which is a term that means something to very few people knows what that means. Road feeder basically means you're running scheduled trucks between airports.
Absolutely.
And so in this scenario, and this is the days when plasma monitors were like $20,000. Now the kids would be like, what are you talking about? Like,
I sold plasma TVs at Best Buy. I know this very well.
$20,000 for a 40-inch screen TV. I mean, that's how insane it was.
Pioneer or Panasonic, that's a great television right there.
Go to your old days of your grandparents. You'll see this in old movies, or you look at your grandparents, probably for the kids listening, your grandparents' houses, and this like the glass on these old CRT monitors were like, I mean, you could kill somebody that thing.
That's a 100, 150-pound television if it's 30 inches. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it did like had a reverse projector of sorts into a screen. It was really bad.
Cathode ray tubes. I love it.
These plasma monitors came out, which were a predecessor to the LED devices that we see today, but they were $20,000, and so they were very expensive and they were very lucrative. If you could get your hands on one, then you could liquidate them for a lot of money, steal it off of a dock and sell it for $5,000. Well, we had a young kid working the dock who was one of our employees. So we had this, we noticed that these monitors were getting stolen. And we had it, so we went and checked the cameras. And sure enough, one of our employees working the dock pulled up his truck, loaded his personal pickup truck with a couple of plasma monitors. And we called the Grapevine, Texas Police Department. And this old stodgy police officer, gray hair, kind of a big dude, comes over. And we show him the video, and he's like, okay, I will investigate this. So his investigation was calling the kid on the phone. I'm not exaggerating. And asking him, did you steal the TVs?
No, I didn't.
Okay, done. Investigation closed. And that was the first time that I became aware that the police don't care about the local municipality, and the local police don't care. There were situations at US Express. This is years ago. A lot of the crime, this cargo theft that we saw years ago wasn't perpetrated the way it is today. Is it sophisticated or less sophisticated? You can use your argument. In those days, I remember there was one weekend, and we had UPS Direct Ship, which is a zone skipping business inside of UPS, sort of predated, this is in the early 2000s. All of Amazon's freight, by the way, ran through this group.
That's right.
Also, if you ever bought an Omaha Steaks, it would be through UPS Direct Ship. Anyway, so UPS had the Dell computer account. And what happened over the course of a weekend was that organized criminals, what they would do is they would park outside the plant in Austin, and this is the time when Dell had a plant in Nashville. Nashville was producing laptops, and Austin was producing computers, like desktop computers.
Okay.
And what they would do is they would have a car that would basically follow the trucks and chase the trucks, and they drove. So it happened to us that we had 2 truckloads stolen. One from Austin and one from Nashville, same weekend. They were both Dell computer loads. There were 8 truckloads stolen over the weekend for a number of carriers, not just us. But what they would do is they would follow the trucks, and they would find where the driver made a mistake, and we were required to use team transit, and we would do verbal dispatch, and we would tell the drivers, you're not to leave the truck. Like, there must be a driver in the truck at all times. But this weekend, it just so happens that they went into a UPS sort facility up in Pennsylvania. I think it was Allentown. And they drive into Allentown, and the sort facility is closed. It's a Sunday afternoon. These trucks had left, I think, Friday night or on Saturday or something. And they drove into the sort facility on Sunday afternoon. The sort facility didn't open till that evening, 8 o'clock something is when that sort facility is open. So the drivers had a couple of hours to kill. So what do? They go to the truck stop. And the 2 drivers, and this happened to two different trucks, but the drivers, both team drivers, left their trucks unoccupied out in the truck stop parking lot. And those trucks were stolen in minutes because these criminals followed the trucks all the way from the plants.
Absolutely.
And they did 8 of them over the course of a weekend. And so they had figured out, and that was the way a lot of crime was. And so we reported to the police. The local police didn't think it was their problem.
Exactly.
Because it involved interstate commerce. And they said, you need to turn it over to the FBI. And then the FBI, this was right after September 11th, and FBI was so focused on the terrorism, the anti-terrorism focuses. That's where all the money and resources were going into tracking down terrorist acts. But they didn't care about cargo crime. And that was where I learned between those 2 incidents and multiple incidents, but certainly those left huge impressions on me. These were documented facts of high dollar crime. I mean, the plasma monitors, a kid probably stole $80,000 a monitor.
No doubt it's a felony. No doubt it's a felony in any state. That's a felony.
They don't care.
That's
because
it.
no one is going to reward them. They're not going to become heroes. Doing a $100 million drug bust is one thing. Investigating a bank robbery, that's a lot more violent. We've had situations at US Express where drivers were held hostage, literally by gunpoint, were robbed. Those the police are set up to deal with heavy violent crime. They're not set up to deal with these, it's in their mind, and I hate to say it, it's a victimless crime.
Exactly. That's the point. I'll pull that thread a little bit further. So in the old days, I had stories my father would tell me of a fully loaded roadway trailer going downtown Chicago, bunch of gangbangers or mafiosos stop the truck. They say, you get out of the truck, we're going to shoot you. Just stay in your truck. They go in the back, they break the seals, they grab all the stuff, and they disappear. And that is one version of opportunistic theft. But to your point, with law enforcement today, they are all understaffed. They're not designed to do these types of investigations, at least for the most part. And if you come to them and say, I lost this load, it was worth this much money, this is the person that did it, yeah, they'll get involved. They might help you in that. But most of the time, they're like, we don't know who stole it. We don't know where they came from. Is it something in the US? Is it someone who orchestrated it overseas? We don't know. So it's this global collaboration to steal. And then for private lawyers, if it's not over 30 or 40 grand, we don't care. I'm not going to be able to help you with anything. And so now we see that it's a small dollar crime per truckload, a couple $100,000. But when you aggregate this, now you're talking billions and billions of dollars. And that's different.
But it's also, this goes back to, so I ran a payments business before. If we sold part of it to US Bank, which is fleet cards, and part of it was bank process. I did it for 9 years, a company called Transcard. And I remember years ago, we had a young kid, his uncle was in prison, his dad was in prison. And we really had high hopes for this kid. This was a chance to get him right. Well, eventually Apple, and I hate to say it, but the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. He figured out how to exploit, and this is a business that did bank processing for banks. And what he would do is he would go into the system and find these old balances that were 3 or 4 years old. And there were small amounts of money, $5, $7, maybe $100 that somebody left on this card. And what he would do is he would just pull those balances off, looks like a customer service request, where the person wanted a refund of their money. And he would transfer the money. And he did this over the course of 3 to 4 months, where you transfer these $3 and $5 and $7 over to another account that he had set up. And it took a while for us to figure it out. And the way we figured it out is we do these bank reconciliations every day. And, the amounts start off $5 off, $7 off. And eventually you start just when you're talking, and it got up to $40,000 off.
Wow.
And we finally have figured out who did it because we tracked it. This was a little early before tracking technology was more common than it is today. It was slightly harder in an AS, it was AS400, by the way.
I love those beautiful machines.
The audit logs were not as clean as what you see today. Anyways, so we figured out it's him, and we call the local police, and they do not care. Mm-hmm. I even had it so much that we had him write out a confession.
Oh, wow.
Admitted it in writing and signed it, and we turned it over to the police, and they arrested him there. But then they lost the paperwork where he admitted he committed the crime. He admitted it in paper and signed it. The police lost it. And so finally we ended up turning it over to the Secret Service.
Oh, wow.
And what they told us was that it had to be a certain threshold. I think $25,000 in these days. before it even mattered. And today, I've talked to the Secret Service about a couple other issues. And there's a local Secret Service office in Chattanooga, which you really don't want to meet them.
If I come visit, I'd love to.
Unless you do. There's a story in there on how I got to meet Secret Service one weekend. I was flying an airplane out of Washington, D.C. And it's a restricted airspace, right? And so you have to file, and I'm a VFR pilot, which means I don't have an instrument rating. I don't typically file flight plans to do it. I'm just flying basically with my eyes. But out of DC, you have to, by law, file a flight plan.
Interesting.
And I flew into Manassas. We had our AI summit up in DC. And I flew into Manassas, no problem. And I flew out of Manassas, but the tower was closed because they had a water main break. Normally, the tower would be like, hey, I need your flight plan information. There was nobody there to do it. So I take off, and all of a sudden I hear my call sign from air traffic control. They're like, because I hadn't checked in with ATC because I wasn't there yet, right?
Oh my goodness. I'm scared. I'm feeling frightened right now, Craig.
Well, the weather started to erode. So I ended up landing about 30 miles from Manassas. And I'm sitting there waiting for the weather to clear. And the sheriff shows up and is like, are you the pilot of this airplane? And I'm like, yes. And he goes, you need to call this phone number right now. So we call it together, and it was Potomac Control, FAA's Potomac Control. And they take my information down. And he goes, do you know that you violated your security protocol? And I'm like, yes, I actually know what you're talking about now. I had forgotten about my training. I had taken it like 7 years ago.
Oh, no.
And so I ended up, a day later, I got home on Saturday. On Sunday, I got a call from the local Secret Service. And they're like, we're investigating your incident. And they came to my office. And that's where I got to know them. And now we have a Secret Service office in town.
That's wonderful.
But what's funny about that is I asked him, I was like, what do you do when there's like, he's like, look, it has to be a big enough crime. It has to be hundreds of thousands of dollars before we'll care.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what we've been talking about is that really the problem that we have in this industry is that it's going to take federal enforcement, federal money,
absolutely,
and federal rights, and it has to be big enough of a crime before any of the authorities are ever going to care.
And to build off that, and I mean this in the most respectful way possible, there is no private company in the United States that can stop the cartels. There's not a single one of them. Highway's great, Genlogs is great, Sonar great, DAT great, all these different great companies that can do certain things, but you need orchestration from the federal side. Otherwise, you're fighting a game that you can never.
There's all law enforcement. I think the other problem is like it is one thing, going back to the two examples I gave about specific crimes, where we have a video of a kid taking freight off the dock. That's like one crime. That's pretty easy to understand. Yeah. Kid doesn't have the authorization to pull up his pickup truck and steal plasma. Or two drivers or two truckloads were stolen at a truck stop. Very clear theft. That's what the law enforcement should do. The kind of crime that we're dealing with right now when it comes to trucking is so, and I will argue, a level of sophistication. Mm-hmm. In the industry, we think it's not very sophisticated. It's just so obvious. It happens all the time. But it's a different kind of sophistication. If you knew how vulnerable we were, and law enforcement isn't, they don't understand this industry.
No one knows how supply chain works. That's the challenge.
And that is the problem. And I think that's why this law is so important, because hopefully the people that will, Homeland Security that will be funded, will get the funding, the training, and the knowledge to understand how these crimes happen to begin with, because they need to be not only investigate them, they need to enforce them, but at some point they have to explain to a jury how they work. Yeah. Good luck with that.
Absolutely. And it kind of goes back to the stuff we talked about in our first time we had this conversation, was FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act, is about safety. Like, they're not designed to go off and deal with cargo theft and fraud.
They're not funded, and they said it's not even in their charter.
Absolutely. So there has to be something different. And this is probably, from my perspective, the most important potential law that will go after this issue. Because if supply chain is essential, and we both agree that it is, then it better be resilient. And it can't be resilient if you don't have regulations in place to prevent strategic cargo theft at a scale we've never seen before.
Well, Matt, this is a conversation we will have again and again and again. This has been exciting. Freight Expectations is off to a stellar start.
Absolutely. The people clamor for it. They demand more.
Well, it's just like tender rejections. It's up and to the right. Massive surge. Lots to be excited about. We're going to break down these topics and many, many more every single week. This is an unscripted podcast. Matt and I literally do not prepare. You may tell. Hopefully not. But we don't prepare coming into it we riff on the topics of the day of what is actually trending on Reddit for Matt and on X for me. And we take the chaos and boil it down to things that you can act on it every single week. That's what Freight Expectations is about. I am your co-host, Craig Fuller, with Matt Leffler. Until next time.
Lawyer. I'm a real life lawyer. That's what makes me special.
Doesn't play just one on podcast TV, right? So, until next time, do subscribe. We appreciate everyone's support.
To the moon or to Ceres.